The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's two-part webinar series on the ingress of Uranus into the sign of Taurus. Tonight we're going to invoke the archetypes of Uranus and also of Taurus and kind of blend them together. As most of you are now getting the feel and the rhythm of these webinar series. And again, in April, we're going to launch the 6-part series. We're still looking for about 6 or 7 chart volunteers that must enroll, be willing to participate with us live, get your free session for an hour from Kim Marie. And we look forward to some more of those enrollments coming through. So you'll get a event newsletter landing in your inbox this week for the Uranus and Taurus Around the Houses 6-part webinar series. That's where you get your most personal and imminent effects of this 8-year transit. All right, so with that, I'll welcome you and turn it over to Kim Marie.
All right, thank you, Leroy. Welcome everyone to Uranus in Taurus. This is part 1, and tonight we're going to look at archetypes, and then in a couple of evenings we will look at cycles. And so let's jump right in, okay? Here at EAN, you can study with us 3 different ways. We have a free weekly audio podcast that Leroy and I produce. We have our astro library. As you can see, there's 3 different sections to it. This is where all of our materials end up sooner or later on these webinars. You can subscribe to it on a 1, 6, or 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. And then, of course, we have our Evolutionary astrology course, and you can see the 3 segments on your screen. Now, segments 1, the philosophy, archetypes, individual, and segment 2, relationships, sexuality, and composite charts. Those 2 segments are available materials only. Here's a picture of what you get, the digital version only, or segment 1 and segment 2 are available both material and digital. Segment 3, health and wellness, is only available in materials so far. We have not digitized that. Here are a couple of webinar series that I've just finished doing, and so they are available on our website. When you go to the home page, I think you'll look for webinars, and you'll see some drop-down boxes of forecasting webinars. That's where you'll find this Saturn in Capricorn series. And the first 2 parts are a 1-part series, and then you can add on your individual house transit or get all 3 of them if you want, all 3 webinars. Same thing with Chiron in Aries. The part 1 is now available on the forecasting webinars by archetypes and cycles. And then, of course, you can get the whole works together, or you can get the individual house that will be your forecasting house with Chiron in Aries. All right. Here are the dates of Uranus in Taurus, 2018 through 2026. And as you can see here by your screen, whenever Uranus changes signs, it is usually comes along with a retrograde where it dips back into one sign before it completely goes forward into the next sign. So you can see this when it goes into Taurus, back to Aries, and then in 25, 26 when it goes into Gemini and goes back to Taurus. So Uranus has an 84-year cycle around the zodiac, and therefore it ends up that it spends about 7 years in each sign. And of course, when Uranus ran into Aries back in 2010, 2011, it initiated one of those new 84-year cycles, which essentially is just the liberation process within our souls. We'll work to liberate ourselves individually, we'll work to do it collectively. And by some luck of the draw, how many of us usually live out a full life around 80 some years? What is the life expectancy in the US now? Isn't it almost 80 years? Women a little more. I want to say the life expectancy of women is now 83. I think it's even a little longer in Japan and a few other countries, but isn't it interesting that we're getting close to that Uranus cycle? Uranus does go retrograde once a year for about 5 months. It averages out that it's retrograde about 42% of the time. When Uranus turns retrograde, and then when it turns direct at the end of a retrograde cycle, it appears to stand still in the sky for about 6 days on each end. We call that the stationary period. Now, probably more than you want to know astronomically, Uranus is an ice giant, methane, hydrogen, helium. It has rings. You can see by the picture in the upper right part of your screen that Uranus actually has rings made up of black dust particles and large rocks. You gotta, to be able to see the rings, of course, you gotta have a telescope. And you can actually see Uranus with the naked eye. I've never done it. I'm nearsighted. I don't have that good of eyesight. But sometimes when Uranus is retrograde, it's closest to Earth. Planets are always closest to Earth when they're retrograde, no matter what planet it is. So in the middle of a Uranus retrograde cycle, if you can get yourself outdoors and away from light pollution, you supposedly can see Uranus with the naked eye. 27 moons. 5 of these moons are large. You can see them on your screen. Uranus also has the coldest atmosphere of any planet in the solar system. And both Uranus and Pluto spin on their sides. In other words, they're not parallel with the Earth in that plane of the solar system and turning even with that. They're turned perpendicular 90 degrees and spin differently. These two don't shake anything up, do they? Just the astronomy of spinning on their sides can introduce that factor for us. As I say every time, I'm not an expert with Uranus mythology, but I do put a couple of little slides up for you. It is the only planet whose name is derived from Greek mythology rather than Roman mythology. And in the ancient Greek literature, Uranos or Uranus was known as Father Sky, son and husband of Gaia or Mother Earth. Some think Uranus was conceived by Gaia alone. Others say he had a dad. Uranus and Gaia, sex with mom here, were the parents of the first generation of Titans. 6 sons, 6 daughters. I thought that was interesting too. I wonder if there's an astrologer who's ever compared the 12 Titans to the 12 archetypes of the zodiac. Interestingly, no occult directly related to Saturn survived into classical times or even into the modern era. And of course, Uranus was accused of raping his mother, Gaia. And so one of his sons decided to castrate Uranus for his mom. And of course, various stories of whether Uranus died from the wound or withdrew from the earth. All kinds of stories we can make up from that, including maybe a trauma or two, which is what Uranus rules. Now, Uranus is an archetype for a quick review. In evolutionary astrology, it's called the individuated unconsciousness. And that contains 3 parts. It contains the past in all its detail of this life and our past lives. It's where we go with past life regression therapy or tuning into the Akashic records for ourselves. We go into our own individuated unconsciousness and look back. It is also the suppression of the present moment than anything we don't like going in our world. And this is where it's Saturn. Saturn being just inside Uranus and the individuated consciousness wants to keep a lid on everything. So it suppresses anything it doesn't want to look at, whatever it wants to ignore, pretend isn't there. Uranus bumps it up to the future. Saturn tries to stuff it down again, and back and forth they go. Uranus is also the blueprint of the future, what traditional astrology called that lightning bolt message, or intuitive hit that we would get, or vision that we would get. So when you look at it from the perspective of future-orientated messages, EA was always saying, or does say, you look at the element of repetition. So first of all, the messages can be clairvoyant, you see them, clairaudient, you hear them, or clairsentient, you sense them or feel them. And if that future message comes 1 to 2 times, it's either fantasy, wishful thinking, or it's way down in the future, 10, 15, 20 years from now. If it comes again and again and again, you're driving your car, you're mowing the lawn, you're making the bed, and you get this future-orientated message repeatedly, this is where your own soul is trying to liberate and move forward with its life. So just think about this over the next few months as, you know, Uranus is going to go into Taurus on May 15th. It's going to go retrograde August 7th at 2.5 degrees Taurus. And then it'll go back into Aries November 6th. So we're going to have Uranus and Taurus for 6 months in 2018. Just those first 6 months, mid-May to mid-November. Think about the messages that come again, relating to all of the Taurian archetypes. Money, resources, Scorpio polarity relationships, where you are insecure, everything that we're going to go through. Just remember, if you will pay attention to your own messages coming up into consciousness, you'll know how you are supposed to liberate and move forward with Uranus and Taurus. Now, most of us have a fear of change. Saturn, security, Uranus, insecurity. And Saturn wants it to just stay like it was. We've built up a routine. We've built up a marriage or a home or a job or comfort in whatever areas you look at it, with resources and people, etc. And now Uranus is going to come along and say, oh, but there's something that needs to change with those resources. There's something that needs to change with relationships as well. Uranus is the deconditioning from all of the conditioning factors in our life. We're all born into a society. Many of us are born into religious and economic conditionings. And of course, we all have 1 or 2 parents, unless we're in an orphanage or adopted. And so we have all these conditioning factors from the moment we take our first breath. Saturn wants that to, again, be routine and be security. And Uranus moving through the signs and Uranus moving through the houses of our chart shakes everything up. And the purpose is to break free from those conditioning factors and to actually liberate into who we uniquely are on an individual soul basis. This is where Uranus is known to be the courage to be a group of one. Traditional astrology is all about friends and like-mindedness with Uranus, and that is true. And we will gravitate towards other people who are like-minded with us. politically, religiously, economically, etc., and then through that form that basis of friendship. But we must be very careful about conditioning all over again. So ultimately, Uranus as a group of one is learning how to be our own friend. And we'll see with Uranus and Taurus and self-reliance how it really is learning to rely upon ourselves and be who we are. Now in health and wellness, Uranus has rulership of the brain, the central nervous system, and with Mercury, it has co-rulership of the nervous system in general. And within the brain, Uranus has rulership of the dendrites. And the dendrites are those spots in our brain, those spaces or places in our brain that hold our memories and that hold new knowledge when we learn something brand new in some way. Uranus also has rulership of those synapses, which fire electrical messages in our brain. And that is where this phrase, what fires together, wires together, becomes so important. This is from Joe Dispenza. Evolve the Brain. Evolve the Brain, I think, was his first book. He was in the movie What the Bleep. He was one of the people interviewed, and he would say that he said that phrase several times in that movie. So when Uranus shakes things up, that which has been wired together is trying to be broken up. And that's why we have to make that new effort to fire something differently. We have to change those mental thought patterns to think differently than we have before, to create something new in our life. Now, on a collective level, Uranus rules contagions. And that means when there is some type of disease that can be spread real easily between two people, somebody next to you sneezes and you acquire a viral imbalance from them, or as we shall see with Uranus and Taurus, is there going to be a mutation of some type of STD, sexually transmitted disease? We could see that coming out again. However, Uranus rules contagions on a broad level, and this is coming from the fact that Uranus is fixed air. Air, things pass through the environment of air, and fixed means we catch it, we have it, and it just spreads on a very broad collective level. Uranus is also the archetype of trauma, both in this present life and in our past lives. And trauma is an intense disturbance that is caused by either a shocking event or stress. And it can happen on a spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical level, and it can have a lasting effect. And when we experience a trauma, and especially if we suppress it, it can then start to dictate those subconscious behaviors. You know, someone who, I'm just trying to think, someone who burned in a past life, someone who, died in a house fire, or, unfortunately, got labeled as the pagan witch and burned in the fire prior, they can just have all these automatic reactions to fire, and a fear of it and not wanting to be anywhere near it. You can just think for a moment yourself, and you're going to know the areas in where you have all of these, subconscious reactions. Now, from evolutionary astrology's perspective, about 85 to 90% of souls are born with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We've learned that as a buzzword with war. It's always existed, but it's actually something that's come into being recognized on collective levels. Uranus has specific rulership of mental trauma because of its rulership of the brain. And so any of the obsessive compulsive personality disorders, Uranus. Sociopathic behavior, schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, any neuroses, any psychosis, all of those mental disturbances that can happen with the brain and the mind, Uranus will have a broad rulership of those. And of course, Uranus is where then we need to make the effort to change the effects of trauma. And this is where we can work alternatively with something like past life regression therapy or hypnotherapy, self-hypnosis tapes. We can work with traditional psychological, sociological therapies. You can work with some of your Native American shaman therapies. In other words, it doesn't matter what it is. You want to take what is unconscious or subconscious. You want to remember it. You want it to come up into the surface so that you can work to be healing it instead of trying to do that Saturnian suppression all over again. If you have transiting Uranus make an aspect to a natal planet in your chart, Uranus will have the effect of helping you remember trauma related to whatever the archetypes of that natal planet represents. And again, unique and different to each of us as to how this will take place. In general, as Uranus moves through Taurus, we can all have memories of trauma in past lives where it was all about survival issues. We didn't live through the battle or the war. We didn't live through the famine. We didn't have enough to survive. We, froze to death or starved to death or whatever it is. So all of us can have past life memories of trauma related to these Taurus archetypes as we move through them. And if something triggers for you, then just see if you can find some meditative energy to reflect on it, bring it up, visualize its healing, or go to any therapies that you desire in order to heal. Now, Uranus is also going to represent our individual and collective impulse to change. So remember, Saturn wants to cling to the past, so it's going to be resisting change. Uranus wants to embrace change, and sometimes we can do it wholeheartedly, 100%. Sometimes we resist 100%, but most of us change in some ways and resist changing in other ways. Very few of us have the ability to leave the past behind 100% and go into a completely unknown future. We move forward a little, we move back a little. Change a little, resist change a little. That is the most common way most of us evolve. Uranus will also have rulership of electricity, all forms of technology. How do you live in your world without Uranus? Very few people do not have technology in their world. Uranus rules inventions, it rules revolutions, and it has a traditional rulership of astrology in general. One other thing to note in general is, again, from 2010 through 2018, Uranus has been in Aries. It's initiated a brand new 84-year cycle, and it wants change, 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 do things differently, upheaval, uproar, chaos, break it all apart. Where are we going to go from here? 20 zillion directions in all ways, says Aries. And now, 2018 through 2026, Uranus in Taurus is going to want to slow down the changes in order to be secure. And guess what? Good luck with that one. Good luck having everything stay stable in your world. Because if there's one thing that happens in the universe, it's evolution. It is change. That is the one constant that we all have. So, breaking down Taurus into its basics, it is ruled by Venus, and this is called the inner side of Venus. Venus's rulership of Taurus in the second house is called inner because of the passive polarity. Passive polarity is energy moving back to the center. It's energy going inward. This is the opposite of Venus's rulership of Libra in the seventh house, which is the outer side of Venus, and the active polarity, or energy moving outward from the center. In general, Venus, whether it's rulership of Taurus second or Libra seventh, relates to the principle of relativity. And on the Taurus or second house side, this is the relationship we have with ourself and our environment, that Taurian ability to survive. Now, relative to the principle of relativity and Libra seventh house, that is the relationships we have outside of ourselves with other people and with our environment as well, collectively with someone else. Say, for instance, in a marriage type relationship and the sharing of resources, etc. Venus also equals values, or that which is important to us. What's important to me individually? As Uranus moves into Taurus, all of us are going to review our values. What's important to me? And if something's no longer important, we can let it go. And we're going to have new values which will emerge for us. Now, we will also review values on a collective level. Probably the most important example I could give anyone in the US who doesn't have their head in the sand is how we are reviewing our relationship with guns and what our values are over gun ownership. Our values are changing from you have the right to have any and all guns under any and all circumstances to going, wait a minute, I value my safety more than I value the freedom to have a weapon of war in an individual's hands. Just an example on the collective level. The real key point here to get, though, is that whatever we value, then we perceive that we need it. A need and a want. We need food to survive. Okay, a want is the whole bag of potato chips versus a handful. And then whatever we perceive that we need and or want, that creates desires. And then desires, Mars's rulership with Aries first house, determines what we're going to act upon. So as all our values undergo review individually and collectively, then what people do as groups and cultures and countries is going to change as well. You know, we might have to be very, very careful of the protectionism by countries as we have become so globalized with our resources. Do we really want to start a trade war with different countries? Uranus in Taurus is all about revolutionizing self-reliance via the exposure of wherever we are insecure. And whatever the degree of insecurity we will feel around an issue, then that will create the level or degree of resistance or inertia that we'll have towards changing. It will be relative to the degree that we want to control or possess whatever it is that made us feel secure from something about our past. So the more insecure we are, the more we resist change. The more inwardly secure we are, the more open we can be to change. And as we learned, Taurus, even though it is fixed modality, nothing stays the same. So our desire to be secure, Taurus, is going to be at odds with the impulse to evolve. And those evolving forces, Uranus, are going to be stronger than the resisting forces of Taurus. Here again, this is why you want to pay attention to the element of repetitious messaging into the future. You want to make every effort to move in that direction as best as you can to minimize your cataclysms. And so there will be an intent here to explore and develop inner security, regardless of whatever your outer circumstances are. Whether you have money or you don't have money, whether you have a relationship or not, or whether you're going through a divorce, whether you have a job or not, whether you're changing jobs, whether you lost your job, it doesn't matter what those outer world circumstances are, they'll be unique to each of us, that everything that becomes an upset, Uranus, outside of ourselves, is how we are needing to deepen our inner security. So here again, evolving that inner relationship with ourself and our environment, all of the Taurian words, self-love, self-acceptance, self-worth, they all create the self-reliance. And as many of you probably are well aware, your outer relationships, Libra 7th, are only as good as your relationship with yourself, Taurus 2nd. This will be good individually. This will be good collectively as well. Uranus in Taurus is going to bring all kinds of shakeups and revolutions with sexuality. On the ultimate level, self-reliance includes sexual self-satisfaction, what we will call masturbation. I'm the only one responsible for making myself happy on a sexual level. Need to have sex with another gender in order to survive the species. So the sexual instinct is very strong here because of the survival instinct with Taurus. But a lot of what Uranus and Taurus will recognize is, wait a minute, I can make myself happy. And of course, sex as income will come up all over again in the news. Prostitution can be one of the oldest occupations or jobs there is in history. And have there been any adult porn stars in the news in the United States recently? And Uranus isn't even in Taurus yet. It's just Jupiter and Scorpio. Wait till Uranus gets in Taurus. It's not going to go away. And of course, one of the biggest things that Uranus will also try to do is break it up so that we have more sexual equality and fairness. Jupiter in Scorpio, October 2017 through November 2018, really opened up the Me Too movement and exposed all of the sexual distortions. Uranus is going to come along over the next few years, if not the next 7 years, and again, blow it out of the water, at least for your more westernized countries like United States and England and Japan. It may or may not happen in some of your Eastern countries. You know, you may see things opening up in various middle countries to some degree. You may see an attempt to clamp down even more. Either way, in the long run, sexual equality is natural law. Sexual inequality is a patriarchal distortion. Sooner or later, it will be addressed. Let's see how much progress Uranus and Taurus can make. And as I said before, Taurus is a survival instinct in all species. And as Uranus moves through Taurus, the physical and biological survival of species will become of value to us. We will start to recognize just how much of the diversity of species on planet Earth we're all going through. There was an article in the mainstream newspapers recently that was reviewing North America and Europe and Africa and all the different continents, and just talking about the percentage of species in regards to flora, plants, and fauna, animals, that we're going to lose if we don't make drastic changes, i.e. climate change, and thinking we have dominion over other species. Expect this to just explode in the news over these next 7 years that Uranus is in Taurus, including, you know, a lot of public debates and battles and nonprofits and organized movements, etc., about what we're going to do in regards to this. And this is even going to include just the species of humans. How many humans can we have on planet Earth before it starts to affect the viability of just being able to have enough food, clothing, and shelter for the individuals we have on Earth? Uranus and Taurus will revolutionize our relationship to resources. I like to use the word resources to include just about everything and anything in the material world. Yes, it includes money and your pocketbook, but it also includes food, clothing, and shelter. A dollar bill really doesn't taste too good, and it could probably prolong the effects of starvation, but you can't eat gold. So the broad relationship to all of the resources we use on planet Earth will be up for review in regards to what we value. And then it will be up to Uranian courses of action as to whether we need to level the playing field in one area or not. Now, consensus state of consciousness, about 7 out of 10 people on planet Earth, any country, any race, it's all about accumulating the material resources. And with Taurus, it can go to the extremes of hundreds of purses and shoes, or, you know, yachts the price of, you know, the income of a state. It can, you know, go to extremes here, and we will see some of those extremes with Uranus and Taurus. We may also see the masses say enough is enough when it comes to wealth inequality as well. Now, in the individuated state of consciousness, this is approximately 2 souls out of every 10 on planet Earth, anywhere you are. We will learn to recognize ourself as a resource. And this one could actually be the intent of what we wanted to recognize, no matter where our evolutionary state of consciousness is. Uranus and Taurus, can I liberate to the level of self-reliance that I recognize I am my own resource and I can create whatever I need to survive, food, clothing, shelter, and flourish. I'm going to have two purses, one for the winter and one for the summer. And of course, the spirituated state of consciousness is approximately 1 out of 10 people on planet Earth. They recognize timeless, universal natural laws and principles. This is where we recognize universal source, God, Goddess, Great Spirit, as the ultimate value and resource there is. And as we move into really recognizing that on deep levels, we can release some of that insecurity. We can deepen the inner security. We can recognize between ourself and our inner relationship with Source, everything we need and desire, or need and want, can show up and manifest for us. Uranus and Taurus will also be about simplifying our resources as well. I have a slide here, it's later on, but for instance, the old statistic is that the United States has 5% of the world's population, but we use 25% of the world's resources. That cannot continue on indefinitely. How will you simplify your use of resources in the United States if you're a U.S. habitat? So Uranus and Taurus will be about the long-term potential to develop new talents in our jobs, our career, and our resource accumulations. In other words, because Taurus in the second house relates so much to the ability to survive the Aries birth. How do we survive in the modern world? Food, clothing, shelter. How do we get food, clothing, shelter? Typically through money. How do we get money? Well, some of us might have the Scorpio inheritance, but for most of us, it's the Taurian work. It's the job. So this is a real potential for Uranus and Taurus, especially in the world of technology. What if we started recycling our garbage dumps in the United States and recycled all of those discarded resources and turned them into new and better things? You may see that through Uranus and Taurus. This is where we're going to learn how to be more efficient with our resources. So there can be all kinds of different green energy jobs or resource jobs that help us learn how to recycle things better and better and better. So for some of us, we're going to learn new talents for survival resources. So it's easier to put food on the table, or we have a little bit better place to live. And for some of us, it's going to be new talents around personal resources, what we value on a personal level. Some of us may not value a big home, but we value the ability to be able to travel. We want to see the glaciers before they all melt. For others, it'll be something else that is a personal value and what we want to evolve and create. We'll do this on collective levels as well. As countries, we'll learn how to provide a basic social safety net for our citizens, or at least it'll be the debate, and we'll see how well each individual country works in creating that bottom foundation of, helping its citizens survive. And collectively as countries, we can switch what we value as a group. There may be some collective shaming that starts to go on over the filthy rich and what are they doing to help us have clean water, or to, eliminate disease in third world countries. You see some of it going on in different ways already. And then, of course, I put in a lot of the distorted words that go with Taurus. Minimal efforts, laziness, inertia. This is where Saturn comes in and says, I don't want to make an effort to change. And when we go that direction, that Scorpio polarity point will create the cataclysms to change. We can be very manipulative or possessive of our resources or of our security to another in a relationship and their resources. We can have withdrawal and isolation, individually or collectively as groups of people. We can just say, I'm going to pretend that I don't notice what's going on in Syria and how everybody is losing home and, food and, the extremes that are going on over there. We can be excessively materialistic, or we can have starvation and the dying off of species again. So this is just some of the archetypes of Uranus and Taurus, and I kind of put these slides in more for you to be able to just reflect upon those on an individual basis for yourself, not saying that they don't also have some impact collectively as well. These archetypes will work both directions. What I would like to do next is look at Uranus and Taurus a little bit historically. We'll see repeating themes. And as we come forward in time and we get to the more recent Uranus and Taurus examples, we can see how we may pick up where we left off. Uranus was in Taurus in 1513 and 1515, and look at two of our most famous artists over in Europe were just working away. They were active through Uranus in Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. Da Vinci actually crossed over into the spirit world with Uranus and Taurus, but Michelangelo was able to live a lot longer. But I mean, who doesn't recognize those names and what they have brought us in the world of art, which is where belongs in Taurus. When we get past survival and we get into flourishing, we can get into some of the indulgences. Now, I just made a slide with individuals who were born with natal Uranus and Taurus. Interestingly, we got a lot of scientists in there. They were mostly males. I put a little effort in to look for a few women. They were more known for their beauty. Julie Andrews, her voice; Brigitte Bardot, her sexuality; Sophia Loren, her beauty. Look at what was published during Uranus and Taurus. Martin Luther's 95 Theses against the sale of indulgences. Indulgences is a Taurus word. With the Catholic Church, you could indulge your sin and then you could buy your forgiveness. And Martin Luther had a little bit of fit with that. He published those theses in 1517, Uranus and Taurus. Shakespeare's heyday, a lot of his plays were Uranus and Taurus. Nathaniel Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Thoreau, Walden Pond. Sexuality, racial inequality, nature. Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities. There's the the wealth inequalities. Charles Darwin, his big book on the origin of species and natural selection. Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind. You all remember Scarlett O'Hara. And then, of course, John Steinbeck of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath. All those during Uranus and Taurus. So let's go back to the early 1600s. Jamestown, Virginia, the first English settlement in America. And by the way, I was going to look this up and put the title in there. New World, that's what it was called. New World. Okay, hold on. I'll get this in my PDF for you. It was a movie several years ago starring Colin Firth, and it was the history of Captain John Smith and Pocahontas, and liberties were taken, but it still had a fair amount of fact in it. But it was absolutely, unbelievably such a lush film. I would encourage you to watch and find this film, New World, with Colin Firth. I think it was Colin Firth, pretty sure. If I got that wrong, somebody correct it and Leroy can put it on there. He's an Irish guy. I think his name is Colin Firth. Anyway, it was just a beautiful choreographed movie of what the U.S. might have looked like when they first came over. No idea where they actually filmed it. But you can just see some of the different Taurian themes that went on. You know, the East India Company, which was so huge with moving all kinds of goods back and forth between Western Europe and Asia. England abolished monopolies, Amsterdam Bank, Whigs, Taurian vanity, probably just to keep themselves clean because they didn't take baths all the time, probably more like it. Move one Uranus Taurus cycle further. First coffee house opens up in Europe. Newton's 3 laws of motion. Earth. And how does it work in this space-time matter on physical Earth? Taurus. And of course, an earthquake, a big earthquake in Turkey that happened in Smyrna. Uranus and Taurus, when we started the American Revolution in the United States, the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, Uranus and Taurus, that led to the American Revolution. It was also the start of the Industrial Revolution in England, and James Watt perfected his steam engine. The first public restaurant opened in Paris. This is different than the inns where you had a place to stay as well as the pub which fed you food. This was a retail place that was just only for a restaurant. And of course, the largest opal in the world was found during Uranus in Taurus. This is called the Vienna Imperial Opal, and it's on display in the Natural History Museum in Vienna today. And of course, the French dauphin married Marie Antoinette while Uranus was in Taurus. They made it for a few years before they got kiboshed, so they didn't get their heads cut off with Uranus and Taurus. 1850 to 1859. Go ahead.
Just before you get off the historical, I just wanted to clarify that New World, which is a great movie. It's a long movie, almost 3 hours, but it was Colin Farrell.
That was who it is.
Who played John Smith, and remember, fell in love with Pocahontas. It was a love story.
Yep.
Around all the history of the time.
Yeah. There's a debate over whether or not they actually were lovers. She was actually married to someone else, and I don't remember if the husband died or something happened, but she did end up marrying an American pastor and had a kid with him. And when they went over to England on a goodwill trip, She caught a disease and perished, and she's buried over in England. But yes, New World, that was a great, great movie. I just loved it. It was a tearjerker, though. Plaster bandages. Taurus, hard. You know, that one kind of stuck at me as I was doing my research. Or a cast, you know, when we break our arm, those came about Uranus and Taurus 2 cycles ago. Wells Fargo was founded during Uranus and Taurus. Samuel Colt, remember the Colt guns? He got started. Steinway pianos. Uranus started in Uranus and Taurus. Haha, here's a Taurian luxury. Cocaine was first extracted from cocoa beans, Uranus and Taurus. The first oil well. Now it happened just barely. Uranus in Gemini is 0 degrees. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I bet you they tried and tried and tried throughout Uranus in Taurus, digging into the earth. But it was actually Uranus in Gemini. Oil is, there are those who feel that Neptune rules oil. But I just thought it was close enough, and I don't remember the date, that there's a Uranus and Taurus element before they were successful. I mean, look at how oil changed our world. Rayon became invented and patented. And then, of course, the sewing machine, steel. France was the first one to create old age insurance. And here's one for you. The U.S. Republican Party was formed. Here's a chart. March 20th, 1854. I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh, I'm just going to look that chart up and see what's there. And so the inner wheel is the Republican Party foundation, founded, established, and the outer cycle is the November 6th midterm elections in the United States. Transiting Pluto on the Republican Chiron and Jupiter. Transiting Uranus on the natal Pluto of the Republican Party, and the transiting nodes square that natal Pluto while Uranus is on it. A Neptunian return. Chiron over the sun. I mean, it just amazing, and sun, transiting sun opposing the natal Uranus. I tell you what, if there's not a pendulum swing towards the Democrats and this midterm election, I don't know what will change it. And there's got to be such a soul searching going on within the Republican Party here of who are we and who do we stand for. And of course, you know, they're the party of conservatism. They're the party of small federal government. And in the year that they've come into office, controlling both the administrative and legislative branches of government, you know, we are now going to have trillion and a half, you know, debts every year. What about balancing the budget, what this party stood for? And of course, they gave themselves, you know, a huge tax cut. I do 0 degree Aries charts when I don't have a time, okay? And I put them in their natural houses, so you can still, I mean, still makes for quite an active chart with everything, even in its natural houses. So isn't this an interesting chart to look at? Stay tuned, we'll see. But I look at this Neptune conjunction and I'm going, boy, these guys are really confused and deep soul searching. And Uranus going over Pluto. You tell me these guys are not going to have some, you know, financial issues coming home to roost with them? I think so. And for next Wednesday's class, I'm going to look up the details of the last 3 times the Republicans were in control and the stock market crashes that happened all 3 times with that. I'll update that for you in our second class on cycles on Wednesday. Comments, questions from anybody as I'm rattling along? You're always open to interact. Any hits from you, Leroy?
No, you just don't see a chart with all of these tight conjunctions and squares. Uh, and it was kind of an arbitrary thing when you looked into that as you prepared for tonight's class. But when you see that, you really see the power of astrology at work. Because, I mean, if you believe in any of the polls that are around about what's going on with some of these special elections prior to the 2018s, yeah, it seems like we might be setting ourselves up. I hate to get too excited though. It's almost like I feel like if I'm too
Exactly.
exuberant about my politics, then we're going to get disappointed again. So forgive me for being once bitten, twice shy. But this chart, it's going to be difficult for them to not only find their identity, Neptune and Pisces. They're struggling now with this bombastic president to do so, and almost going to be implicated in some kind of a conspiracy to maintain the status quo. And I think the American people are going to be smart to figure that out by 2008, by this fall.
I do too. The other thing that'll happen is I did the midterm chart for 7 a.m. in Washington, D.C., and the polls are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so what will have happen is the transiting moon will also move into Scorpio and oppose Pluto and Uranus while it squares the nodes for a few hours in the sky. And then this transiting moon in Scorpio is going to oppose this Uranus as we get towards the end of the poles closing. Venus is retrograde at late Libra, still within orb of opposing Pluto and squaring, this Jupiter Chiron over here as well. It's going to be interesting, folks. So, if you're of the progressive movement and you live in the United States, you might want to see how much energy you want to put into helping the youth of this country make a change, not only with gun control, but with just progressive issues that help improve the lives, Taurus, of all the masses, Uranus and Taurus, throughout the rest of this year. Last time Uranus was in Taurus, we know most of us in North America know it as what was called the North American Dust Bowl, or what we would call the Dirty 30s. Both my parents have Uranus and Taurus. Leroy, I think your mother might be Uranus and Taurus, maybe not. But we both grew up with parents here in South Dakota in the Northern Plains. And for us, it was parents from the dirty 30s. If we heard it once, we heard it gazillion times. A penny saved is a penny earned. And that's Taurus. So the U.S. farm mortgage was created. The U.S. Social Security Act, that's going to be the next slide. I'll show you this one too. The U.S. Wealth Tax Act. We had the income tax before that. The first major income tax in the U.S. was in 1913. But the New Deal was the first time we created a progressive income tax, which meant the more you earned, the higher rate you would be taxed at. There's been all kinds of changes, but this was a big switch during the dirty 30s and the scarcities then, We established the 40-hour work week, Uranus in Taurus. Bank of Canada, Hoover Dam, largest reservoir in the world. Talk about deciding to change physical Earth. We dammed the Colorado River and created the largest reservoir in the world. The Golden Gate Bridge finished construction and opened up. And of course, we all know Hitler came into power at the end of this, and World War II started in 1939. Here's another interesting one that I really liked. Nylon stockings were invented. And I showed a picture for you. And no sooner than they invented nylon stockings, Taurus, World War II broke out, and they forbade women to have nylon stockings, and all the nylon went to making parachutes for World War II. So women took to, and I didn't show you the picture here, but you probably saw those nylons, and there would be the seam that would run down the back of the leg. So when women couldn't have nylons after they, just got a taste of them and they ran off with them, they literally started selling products where you could rub a color on your legs, and then you could take a pen and you could draw the back line. So women painted on nylons during World War II when they were forbidden to wear them. Isn't that an interesting tidbit for Uranus and Taurus? So this was the last time we had Uranus and Taurus here, and there's more things. I just try to come up with something interesting for you out of different categories. First time we used insulin for controlling diabetes. I think this next Uranus and Taurus, we could see some major breakthroughs in regards to diabetes. However, given the issue of how overweight the American citizenry is, we could also look at diabetes just becoming exponentially out of control and huge health costs through this Uranus and Taurus if we don't know how to do something about the Taurian gluttony. Here is the 1935 Social Security Act signed in by FDR, President Roosevelt. And again, don't really have a time, so I use 0 degree Aries. Taurus is 5, or Uranus is 5 Taurus. Social Security Act is going to have its first Taurian Uranus and Taurus return. First aspect that's going to come up here, 1919-20. But transiting Uranus is going to oppose Mars. It's going to oppose Jupiter. It's going to square the Sun. It's going to square the Moon. It's going to square Mercury. And I've listed all those aspects right here between 2019 and 2025. Stay tuned. Social Security is going to be in the news. And if you live in the United States, you can count on the 1% and some of the powers that be in Congress to try and screw around with it, let's say. Thank you, international listeners, for letting me use the United States as some chart examples here. I always appreciate it. Now, Uranus will make trines to Neptune and Venus. It'll make a sextile to Saturn. It'll make sextiles to Pluto in that South Node conjunction. Look at this right here. I just really, I see them having a hard time taking it away. But I also think, do you know that there are suggestions out there where we take every child born in the United States and give them $7,000 tied to their Social Security number, and we literally put it in the stock market and let it grow for the next 70 years and give them a retirement income that way? interesting. There may be some progressive ideas that come through Uranus and Taurus, but because of that possessiveness, manipulation that it can exist, Taurus, Scorpio, we may see some monkey games come around with it as well. So U.S. citizens, just a little heads up to these aspects right here. And another one of those areas where we might be active 2018 to 2026. Here's one for you. How many of you played the game Monopoly? It was invented by a female, Elizabeth Magee. Her first patent on the game was 1904. Then there were a lot of copycats that came about, and one of her most specific updates to her patent was in 1932, Uranus in Taurus, where she created two versions of the game. She's, the thought is she always had two versions. She called it the landlord's game and prosperity. She didn't call it Monopoly. The landlord's game was actually where you played it till there was one winning landlord who had a monopoly on everything. And that's how we know the game today if you see this photo. However, when she first created this game, and this is her drawing of it down below here, okay? She also created a second half to the game where when someone was getting ready to go bankrupt or lose all their resources, money and or land or buildings, they could call the rule prosperity. And then rents would be put into a common pot that everybody could win. And they would play the game until the poorest player, the one who called prosperity rules, they would play the game until he or whoever, until the poorest player doubled their capital. So I didn't go into all the details. I've heard this before. But so let's say the poorest player was the one who says prosperity rule. Instead of everything going to the landlord, they switched it. They put it all into a general pot that as you went around the board, you could win. And she specifically created this game in response to the wealth inequalities of the Gilded Age. So we know which side of the game became really popular. But isn't that an interesting tidbit for Uranus and Taurus? Here's some collective themes that we can look at. It's not a be-all, end-all, but it'll start to give us some ideas of what we are actually working forward to. And it took me a little willpower to put that polar bear in this picture. I almost didn't. And then I was like, no, you just got to do that. I have a hard time with sick animals and poor animals, and my foreleg is not being good. You know that song that was popularized by some rock and roll player? Money, 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 or whatever it is. Uranus and Taurus, there will be financial upsets intended to evolve the monetary systems. Remember, Uranus intends to decondition and liberate us as souls individually. Well, it also intends to do that on collective levels as well. And in natural law, Mother Nature is abundant. And so, natural laws will be attempting to do that. What we're going to have going on with Uranus and Taurus, though, is dueling incentives. Those who want to keep those extremes of wealth and equality, which is that Taurian 1%, or what we would call the wealthy elite, the rich. And then the Uranian desire to redistribute resources more evenly. As we go around the zodiac and we go from the Aryan self-focus all the way to Pisces, holding the broadest circles we can. This is where Uranus gets into those collective groups, those who want to disrupt the system to create more fairness and equity. It includes those who want anarchy and no laws whatsoever. However, most of it is, how do the collectives learn to live together as groups of people based upon whatever laws we've made through Capricorn coming from our Sagittarian philosophies? Stay tuned. It's going to be a back and forth to see how it turns out. I guess the only guarantee is that we will see financial shakeups more than once. Various people, various countries, various places. So how well can you simplify your world? I'll get more into currencies here in a moment, but all kinds of monetary systems that could be destroyed. Private banking has been trying to destroy all kinds of monetary systems and currencies in South America, where they are more socialistic. We'll see different things changed. We'll see things initiated. I mean, who hasn't heard of the emerging cryptocurrencies? Private banking systems are going to be very intent on remaining in control. And I think this is where we're going to see the real battles. Pluto in Capricorn through 2023-24. Uranus in Taurus through 2025-26. This is where we're going to battle it out between the public versus private banking systems. And this is where I will wager my money. Public banking is going to win out. Anytime you have wealth extremes between the 1% and 99%, the way you have, it's going to have an upset to create something that is more equitable. Here's a fact for you. There are 3 people in the United States that have as much wealth as the bottom half of the US population. Those 3 people are Bill Gates, who co-founded Microsoft, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway. These 3 individuals have as much wealth as half of the country in the US. Blows your mind, doesn't it? There are 8 individuals in the world who have as much wealth as the bottom half of the world's population. I don't know the names of those 8 people, and I didn't take the time to look them up. So you can just see how the odds are stacked. But all we're going to need is enough of the masses to go Uranian change, and it will happen. Evolving forces overcoming resisting forces. Now, multinational corporations will continue to accumulate wealth unless we demand it be done differently. Stay tuned. There will be some multinational corporations that'll get away free and clear, and there'll be others that don't. I remember growing up, my mother was a telephone operator. My father, my parents were farmers, but I was born when my father was in the military, and he was stationed in San Francisco, and my mom went out there and married him. And my mom got a job in the telephone company, AT&T. You know those pictures? Remember the Angelina Jolie movie where she was in the roller skates channeling, I think it was called. Anyway, she was a supervisor who skated up and down this long row of women sitting there and plugging and unplugging and plugging and unplugging, moving all the long distance phone calls back and forth. That was my mother. And she left when they came back to South Dakota. I was 6 months old. My mom got a job with AT&T in our state, and she knew every area code in the United States back then. And AT&T was a monopoly. We called it Ma Bell. And that was where my mom spent her whole career. She was one of those women who worked outside of the home early. Anyway, they broke up AT&T. Remember that? We don't break up monopolies anymore with Pluto and Capricorn. So stay tuned with Uranus and Taurus. We'll see. Just wait till Pluto goes into Aquarius. We could see breaking up those monopolies. It's very hard to create a small business nowadays. They're all franchises. Stay tuned. Hope it will change. Now, some of you may have seen a few of these slides here. This is my soapbox. Uranus and Taurus will expose the truth of monetary systems. Public central banks return interest to the government, people, and infrastructure. Private central banks loan money to the government to be paid back with interest by the people or the taxpayers. And so publicbankinginstitute.org, no matter where in the world you live, you can support it. Here is a book by Ellen Brown, my heroine. These are the countries that have private central banking. These are the countries that have public central banking. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the S is South Africa. You can see at one point that Canada and Australia did have public banking. The only state in the Union, in the US, with a public state bank is the Bank of North Dakota, which was founded in 1919. I am really hoping that the Public Banking Institute can really get the word out in 2019, 100 years later. Are we going to have the second state in the country? Will we have 5 states create public banks? In other words, all of North Dakota's state assets and state income stays in North Dakota. It doesn't go to Wall Street, or at least they own it, and it gets relended back out. 2015, this is the year the oil industry tanked. And the numbers are very similar in 2016-17 while we still have low oil prices. 18% return on equity. 300 new businesses created in North Dakota, exception to the rule. North Dakota has more banks per capita in the nation than any other state because it partners with the private banks. It acts like a mini Fed. I think the figure is North Dakota has 7 times as many banks per capita as the national average of all the other states put together. The Bank of North Dakota has 4 mandates: loaning to agriculture, small business, mortgages, and student loans. And they have the lowest defaults in all of these areas. The statistics go on and on and on and on. I highly recommend, if you live in the US, that you join and support Public Banking Institute. At least get on their email list and educate yourself. The governor of New Jersey, Democrat, old Wall Street banker, just got elected last November, ran on a public bank platform for New Jersey. Full guns ahead. Bill in Michigan to create a state bank because they're so bankrupt. It's going to go the way of cannabis. Once we start a few states, cities, counties, and everybody recognizing what can be done, there will be a flush of this through Uranus and Taurus. And I can't wait, and I can't wait to say, I told you so to Wall Street. Don't put your money in big banks, credit unions, and community banks, and especially because they just weakened the Dodd-Frank Act here in the United States. Educate yourself. Ellen Brown started Public Banking Institute. Web of Debt is her own personal website. She also has another book getting ready to come out anytime now. As soon as I see that book come out, I'll be talking about it on the weekly podcast. Do you want background on money and how we create money and the history of money? This is a free YouTube video that you can go to on our YouTube site and give you a lot more detail on it. Let's talk about Bitcoins. I'll just tell you right off the bat, I'm not really a fan of Bitcoins. I'm a bigger fan of public banking. It's going to be a lot easier to beat them at their own game and not have to change the currency from the dollar or the euro, you know, or the lira or, you know, the franc or whatever it is across the world. But digital currencies or cryptocurrencies, it's all done with computers. And that's what, and they're basically decentralized virtual currency. 97% of money is done via computer transactions. Only 3% of money is actual bills and coins. 97% of money today is created through debit and credit entries with a bank when it creates a loan. But you had to pay it back with interest. You can make loans zero interest free, by the way. We just don't do it. But cryptocurrencies, again, they are units or bits that are, you know, basically exist in a computer. And the transactions take place directly between the users. And they have very small exchange fees. Their fees are about 0 to 2% compared to credit and debit cards, which charge 2 to 3%. They're gaining a lot of acceptance. The reality of cryptocurrencies, and specifically Bitcoins, and probably a lot of the others as well, is that they act more like a stock investment than an actual currency. They have a fluctuation that goes up and down a lot more rapidly than, say, the value of the dollar or the pound. The cons of Bitcoins is that what happens is it's known as the blockchain technology. And so every Bitcoin, every unit is encrypted via computers, and it cannot be spent more than once. Think of this with a dollar bill. For those of you who still use a dollar bill or a $10 bill, how many times does that change hands before the bank thinks it's too dirty or worn and it's retired and replaced with a brand new dollar bill? It's very decentralized, okay? So you can be anonymous, but it does make it kind of easy to launder money. You can buy Bitcoins with laundered money, and then you can turn that Bitcoin into your fancy new car if you want to as a drug dealer. Here's the reason that I mainly do not like Bitcoins. Extremely energy intensive use of electricity via computers. That may change in the future. Stay tuned. But right now, the amount of Bitcoins in U-Sheets today uses as much electricity as the state of Rhode Island. If we all used Bitcoins, we wouldn't have enough electricity left over to light our homes or heat our homes. So stay tuned for this issue to be discussed out through Uranus in Taurus. Here's the other thing about the blockchain technology. All your private banking is getting on board with it. And they're getting on board with it very much behind the scenes until there's enough demand for it, and then they're going to want a government to create a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency that the government says this is the only legal tender that we will accept. And they want to create it so that the blockchain technology can be controlled and turned on and off by someone in power. Who will that be? Government, financial elites, private banks. This is the danger of Uranus and Taurus, in which the 1% will want to keep it. Now, here's what happened back a couple of years ago in May of 2016. There was a secret meeting of all these executives from the world's largest financial institutions, not just the US, the world's largest financial institutions. They had a meeting in Times Square, and they were debating how to change US dollars into true digital assets through the blockchain technology. It's an open source technology, but it can be controlled. And so if we would go into that, it would eliminate the need for banks. You wouldn't need debit cards or credit cards. You wouldn't need checks. And oh, by the way, we could eliminate cash. How much could you control a currency if it didn't exist in cash anymore? You're not behaving very well, Mr. Smith. We are going to cut off your Bitcoins. And so the debiting and crediting of ledgers, which is now done by banks with simple accounting entries, could happen without the bank, and it could be controlled by whoever was going to be the referee. And that referee could award, remove, or adjust the digital dollars or currency at will. So you could manipulate currencies for national security purpose. You could prevent global access to information and communications. Now, if we would go forward with this, it would create a lot of interest in non-digital currencies. Everyone would have to do it for the global elite to control it globally. And that might be a tough thing to do. Pay attention to see whether or not you hear about SWIFT. It's an alternative global clearing system outside the US. The banking elites in the US are in cahoots with the banking elites in Europe, and they all are based out of Basel, Switzerland. And that's where a lot of the decisions happen, even though the meeting was held in the US on this blockchain technology. It's still controlled a lot in Basel, Switzerland. But SWIFT is the alternative to Basel, Switzerland. We will see if they gain ground. There's going to be a lot that's going to go on with this during Uranus and Taurus. And the whole big issue is who gets to have the control? Taurus, resources. Scorpio, polarity, collective resources. Stay tuned. It hasn't been written, but because of the extensive energy use of cryptocurrency, I'm not a fan. And because we will have some entities that could come along and really want to control it, I'm not a fan. I'd rather take the current currency we have, for instance, in the United States, and just create city banks, county banks, state banks, and decentralize that way, where your city fathers and mothers would be in control of infrastructure for their local community. States would be in control of their infrastructure for their local communities. By the way, the Bank of North Dakota is sitting on $2 billion in assets, cash. It's not from the oil. It's the profits of a 100-year-old bank. And we can all easily do that, no matter what city or country you live in. It's a matter of Uranian education across the internet. Here's another one. Universal basic income. Some of you have been hearing me say this. As this Uranian technology continues to expand, and it's only going to increase as we move more and more into Pluto in Aquarius, Uranus's sign, and then into the Aquarian age, robotic technology is going to replace human labor. There's going to be fewer and fewer jobs, and there's going to be more and more people wanting the job for food, clothing, and shelter. So this whole concept of UBI, or universal basic income, is starting to happen in conversations all over the world. We'll see more and more of this of Uranus and Taurus. Food, clothing, and shelter, basic survival needs. Most people are saying a universal basic income isn't going to meet all of your basic needs right off the bat, but it'll give you a helping hand up, and it'll let you be free and creative, perhaps in some other ways. Now, if you join the public banking bandwagon, where the interest is returned back to the government, i.e. the people and the taxpayers, on a city level, a county level, a statewide level, that can supply the source for UBI. Today, doesn't matter where you are, anywhere that you have big infrastructure projects going on in the US, in Europe, wherever else it is. China might be an exception because the government funds those infrastructure projects, but almost half of the cost of any project goes to interest. We're actually on the low side. Our city wants to put in a new civic center, very controversial here right now in our conservative little city in a red state. And they want to build a $130 million civic center. They're sitting on $25 million in cash, so they've got the down payment. But after interest, that $130 million will cost $180 million. So we're getting by, you know, on a little less than average because we've got some savings built up. But can you see how much further infrastructure will go if we do not have to pay that cost-bearing interest to the few? And it goes back to these projects for clean water and safe bridges, etc. Climate change, earth events will lead the human species to recognize we have a relationship with planet Earth, or Gaia. Remember Uranus's mother? Can we take care of Mother instead of abusing her? There will be increasing natural Earth events with Uranus and Taurus. Climate change will become a given. We will recognize our effect upon the planet. And of course, Neptune isn't going to get out of Pisces until 2026. Uranus will go into Gemini and Neptune will go into Aries in the middle of the next decade together. So all the time Uranus is in Taurus, Neptune's going to be in Pisces, where we're going to have these deep spiritual, religious conversations about Earth and all of its species and the planet. Now, Uranus in Taurus will change coastal living as the seas rise and more people have to move inland. Huge displacements. I can't remember what the statistic is. It's ridiculous. It's something, I'm just going to pull this out of my head, but I have no idea what the number is. Let's say 2/3 of the people or 3/4 of the people live along our coasts worldwide. And so can you imagine the shelter that's going to have to shift because we're underwater? So Uranus in Taurus will explode green energy. and all of the technological advancements, you know, with wind and solar, and eventually fusion. Nuclear energy right now is fission, which explodes atoms. Fusion brings atoms together. The sun actually provides all of its energy for us through nuclear fusion. It's a subject you can go research. That will be something we'll know more and more about through Uranus in Taurus. There'll be things that are going to happen in regards to, you know, alternative energy that we can't even imagine right now. That'll be commonplace in the next 5 to 10 years. It will explode through Uranus and Taurus by necessity. Earthquakes. Taurus is Earth. Uranus shake things up. Anybody remember Fukushima? Uranus went into Taurus the spring of 2010. Uranus ran into Aries the spring of 2010. It retrograded back into late Pisces. And then February 11th, 2011, it entered Aries the second time, and it's been in Aries ever since, to the day. We had, I don't know how you pronounce that, Tohoku earthquake. And it was the tsunami afterwards. Neptune just moving into Pisces. It was the tsunami afterwards that created the nuclear disaster. 3 reactors are still full of radiation, and 70,000 people are still displaced from their homes. There are many astrologers that feel Uranus in Taurus is going to initiate all kinds of Earth events, especially earthquakes. It's because of the sign in Taurus. I think with climate change and Uranus being fixed air, we can see increased wind events as well. You know, I'm nothing but anecdotal, but Leroy and I comment to ourselves, does it seem like it's windier than it used to be? Does it seem like if we have, you know, more stronger winds, higher winds, I think we might see those events as well as earthquakes with Uranus in Taurus. We will also see an acceleration of our connection to the world with technology. There's no getting around it. I have a mother who doesn't know how to use a computer. I have a dad who refuses to have a cell phone. But that is not the way that it's going to go with the changing of the world. I spoke about this one as well before. Conventional versus quantum computing. Conventional computing is what we have now. It's a calculator. It's binary. It only stores and computes a 1 or a 0. And we keep making them smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're about as small as we can physically make them. What we will be moving into is quantum computing that will be done with atoms and subatomic particles. And there we can store multiple values at the same time, a 1, a 0, a both, or anything in between. And then quantum mechanics will allow computers to work parallel at the same time instead of serial. And it's based upon quantum physics, where light can be the particle and the wave at the same time. This is Uranus in general. This is Uranus in Aries for the last 7 years and initiating a new 84-year cycle. This is going to be Uranus in Taurus, and it's going to bring about the beginnings of artificial intelligence. intelligence, and it's just going to exponentialize. Artificial intelligence has been written about by Dan Brown's new book, Origin. You can play with that if you want to. Brings up lots of subjects. And of course, it's going to move us closer and closer to the Aquarian age. And the next time Uranus makes a conjunction to Neptune, it'll be 6 Aquarius. The last two Uranus-Neptune conjunctions, 1993 and 1821, were both in Capricorn. So this next one, I mean, it's coming. We'll all probably be gone and back again by then. And we're just going to come into it knowing what it is we're going to be working with. Now, with the Uranus in Taurus cycles, I'll work more with this Wednesday. But Uranus in Taurus is going to make 5 waxing semi-squares to Neptune and 7 waxing biseptiles to Pluto. Huh? Stay tuned. More on that. But it will continue to have the whole science versus morality debate going on, especially with the Uranus-Neptune semi-squares. Medicine will explode with genetics and genomics, whatever that is. You know, medicine and technology has been outpacing ethics for quite a while now, and it will continue to do so, especially as we become half human, half robot. We manipulate genes. We're going to have augmented reality where we can see through the body without having to cut through the skin. We're going to have medical MD or 3D printing. We're going to print organs. We're going to print a new ear if you lose your ear, or print a finger that they can reattach. We're going to have handheld energy machines that evaluate without traditional testing. For those of you who are not aware of it, I've been involved with the AIM program of energetic balancing for 18 years now. It's where we take your photograph and we impart 500,000 healing frequencies into it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It revolutionizes your ability to self-heal anything that we will call a disease imbalance, let alone the ability to slow down the aging process. There's my website if you want more information. And of course, we'll have all kinds of biometric chips or tattoos known as e-skins that'll just measure everything in real time. I mean, I only put one slide out for this issue, but we could look at 100 slides on this issue. You know, that ability to survive with Uranus and Taurus is just going to make the whole world of medicine explode. Now, relative to resources and money, how are we going to shift the payments of that? Stay tuned. When we move to universal health care in the United States, the last industrialized country that doesn't have it, stay tuned. All up in the air. All will be decided according to the collective Uranus masses, Uranus, and whether we decide to move forward or stay stuck. In regards to the Earth's resources, the United States has 5% of the world's population, and it uses 25% of the world's resources. So food, basic here with Taurus. The effects of climate change is going to really create chaos in, again, providing enough food for all of the people on planet Earth. As we lose diversity with our flora, it can open it up for more mutation, Uranus, of pests and diseases, and there can be unintended consequences out there. We're looking at multinational corporations that want to control all aspects of the food chain, from the seed to to the planting, to the growing, to the harvesting, to the producing, to the selling and eating. And if we do have a monopoly of the food, can you see how enslaved we are, even if we don't have the chain around our ankle? And as we lose that biodiversity with food, we can easily have some pretty big malnutrition in the future, or overweight and undernourished. So the potential for Uranus and Taurus is to actually protect Gaia, to protect Mother Earth, to work in creating and preserving, first of all, the diversity of all the flora and fauna. And then, working with new foods instead of monopolizing foods. Kurzna is a form of wheat, and it's a perennial grain rather than wheat, which is typically an annual grain. And so if we can turn some of these grains into being perennials, we disturb the soil less. Dust Bowl, Uranus and Taurus in the 1930s, anybody? We've come a full circle. I'm a Master Gardener volunteer with our state's land grant college, and I had a training last week, and whoever our speaker was, I don't know who it was, but they brought in a substitute, and he was with the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, and he did a PowerPoint slide, and he was an extreme advocate of no-till farming, not disturbing the soil. And he brought in sample of the no-till from his garden, earth that had been, trampled down to nothing, and then native prairie. And he showed us the 3 different examples and how in his no-till garden he was trying to return all that disturbances back into the native living, organic, breathing soil. That is what we call our native prairies. And once we disturb it and trample it, it takes a long time to rebuild it. We can do it, but boy, does it take a long time, years, decades, let alone the fact that we've had millennia for nature to do the job better than we even think we can. So Uranus and Taurus will turn all of the food production topsy-turvy. Stay tuned. Some of it will be more monopolized, and other parts of it will become more diversified. It can be different country by country, et cetera, et cetera. It's just going to depend on those masses. The return of the monopoly is what we have to be careful of. Here's just a couple of statistics. 80% of U.S. health insurance controlled by 5 companies. 85% of U.S. beef, 4 companies. 70% of U.S. beer, 2 companies. Go craft breweries. I'm not a beer drinker. We've seen a lot of resurgence, especially at least for us in the northern plains where we grow barley, oats, hops, grains. There's been a resurgence of your craft breweries, and even now into the distilleries of the spirits as well, and the wines. When we see that kind of stuff, just like food, flourish with Uranus and Taurus. So the monopolies will either want to concentrate for the money and the control of the resources and the money, or we will find the courage to break them up. Guns. We won't belabor this one in the United States. We know the rest of the world, or at least probably most of us on this call know that a lot of the world shakes their head at us at how outrageous we are with guns. This is just a statistic from 2015, from 0 to 100. For every 100 people, how many guns do your industrialized countries have? And of course, Japan, you can't even barely see the statistic. I think it was last year, 2017, either 2016 or 2017, Japan only had 8 gun incidents in its entire country of 127 million people. Their cops don't even carry guns. Look at the United States. I think the statistic has increased because this is, 2-3 years old. Last I heard, we have just over 1 gun per person in the United States. Oh, and Uranus in Taurus packages. Now we're going to have packaged bombs. Stay tuned in regards to the gun control. I think our young adults will bring it around. Of course, social media, same thing. The debate is just going to continue of how well an organization like Facebook can collect and distribute your individual data and how the fake news is going to spread. But in the same respect, we have an ability to self-educate Uranus faster and easier and better than we ever have before on a worldwide basis for those of us who are looking for information. And of course, with Uranus and Taurus, the more insecure we are, the more we're going to refuse to look at a diversity of opinions. And the more secure we are, the more open-minded we can be to consider looking at things from different perspectives. Last Friday, was it Friday? Last Saturday. Last Saturday was March 24th, the March for Our Lives with the youth on gun control in Washington, D.C. Leroy wasn't home, and I was just doing a bunch of mundane work in bookkeeping. Taurus. So I switched the TV from Fox to CNN to MSNBC. Fox, CNN, MSNBC. I went through all 3 channels cycling, watching this march in Washington and all across the country and the world to just observe how 3 different TV stations, conservative Fox, liberal MSNBC, and maybe neutral CNN, how they all carried it differently. It was real interesting watching Fox News. I had trouble, but I forced myself to say, you just need to be aware. And I'm like, whoa, I'm sorry. As Leroy likes to say, somebody drank the Kool-Aid. Briefly, Scorpio polarity. It will bring about the necessary cataclysms to expand our individual and collective perspective of the universe. Taurus wants to be secure. This is what I know. This is my own little perspective of the world. Don't shake it up. And when we're stuck, Scorpio's going to come along and blow up the smithereens. It'll create those emotional shocks and confrontations, however necessary. It will dig up our deepest emotional fears that will turn us inward to that Taurian self-reliance. With Scorpio polarity, Taurus is our own resources and Scorpio is shared resources. And, with Scorpio, we can have a fair sharing of resources. The parent dies and all 3 children equally inherit the same amount of money, or it can have the distortions. The parent dies and the oldest son gets all the money and the rest of the children don't get anything. It can go either way, but there will typically be, because of the inequalities of wealth we have, resource upsteps and redistributions. How many of you know this? How many of you know what the debt jubilees are from the Old Testament? I didn't know this until recently. In the Old Testament, it used to be that every 7 years, they would wipe out every individual's debt so that everybody had a chance to start over. I don't know how long that lasts, but it's an old parable in the Old Testament. And so when you hear somebody talking about a new jubilee coming, what they really mean is a redistribution of the wealth inequality. How can our children get ahead when they're saddled with as much college debt in the United States as what it takes to buy a house? It's that resource enslavement. So we'll see more power grabs around resources and land. They don't make any more land anymore, Taurus, as my dad always says. And of course, wars over all the commodities, the food, the minerals, the water. And of course, the ethical debates. Scorpio, we'll get into that, as well as Sag, over technology. Who gets to decide which babies live, which babies die? Who gets to decide how we're going to manipulate the genes? The Scorpio polarity can easily bring about sexual scandals and, as I had said earlier, contagions with STDs. When Pluto was in Scorpio, that's when the AIDS virus, the HIV, came out. We could see another scandal of that while Jupiter is in Scorpio, and then as Uranus goes into Taurus, there could be something that mutates out there all over again. And of course, this can really begin the abortion debates, because Scorpio is sex with someone else. What happens when you have sex with someone else? Ooh, you might get pregnant. Oh, and there might be a baby. So there will be, I expect the abortion debates to intensify. I expect them to try to turn around or turn over Roe versus Wade in the United States. I don't know if they will be successful, but if we look at this overpopulation that is just expanding exponentially, Uranus and Taurus, what about birth control? Maybe even sterilization in some ways, another area to debate. And of course, we'll also look at the necessity of clean, fresh water. I didn't know there were this many countries that had desalination plants. And of course, the United States being in debt head over heels over all these wars that we haven't paid for. We've only paid for about 20% of the costs of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. So we've got all these debts over all these wars, but we have nothing to put into clean water. And that is only going to intensify as we go through Uranus and Taurus. Food. You think food gets scarce. What if you don't have water? What is it? You can only go three days without water, but you can go 3 weeks without food. Can't remember what it is. I want to say it's 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. So just touching in, these are my, that's all my slides for now. I thank you all for listening. Oh boy, did I time that one pretty good. Touching in upon the subject, stay tuned for more things as we look at Uranus and Taurus and some of the cycles, especially as we go into the fact that nobody even thinks Uranus has any aspects. It's got 5 aspects to Neptune and 7 aspects to Pluto while it's in Taurus. By Wednesday, I'll know where my volunteers are. I have registrations coming in for part 2. I just haven't had time to draw up the charts, first come, first serve, and see where the houses are. If you would like to volunteer your chart for Uranus in Taurus transiting your personal house, you register for part 2, you send us an email with your birth data wanting to be a volunteer, and again, it's first come, first serve. And by Wednesday, when we look at the cycles, I'll know which open houses I have left. All right, questions or comments with anything? Do I have my media monk or my Leroy? Media monk. Are you there? He's downstairs in the studio. Did he run off to the men's room?
I was actually talking into a mic that was unplugged.
Okay.
But no, you're all there on the board, and nice presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And if no questions, thank you very much, everybody. And I'll see you for the second part of Uranus in Taurus with its cycles on Wednesday. Good night, everyone.